The first sign something was wrong came at 3:47 hours, when the motion sensors in Armory Block C went dark. Staff Sergeant Martinez noticed it on his third cup of coffee, the kind of detail that separates good security personnel from dead ones. The grid showed a clean blackout, not a malfunction, not interference. Someone had methodically disabled each sensor with surgical precision, leaving a corridor of blindness through the most secured section of Kandahar airfield. What Martinez couldn't have known, as he reached for his radio with trembling fingers, was that Lieutenant Commander Vera Ghost Kozlova was already 3 moves ahead of whoever had made the catastrophic mistake of hunting her on her own base. The woman they'd cornered wasn't just any pilot grounded for attitude problems and failure to follow protocol. She was a shadow from the Navy's most classified operations, a weapon disguised as a disciplinary case. In the suffocating darkness of the Armory, surrounded by enough firepower to level a city block, 5 figures moved with practiced silence. They wore no identifying marks, carried weapons that didn't exist in any official inventory, and communicated through hand signals older than the wars that birthed them. Their target sat cross-legged in the center of the room, her back against a rack of M4 carbines, seemingly unaware of the death closing in around her. "Contact acquired," whispered a voice through encrypted comms. "Target is stationary, appears to be sleeping." The figure they were watching had earned her call sign Ghost, not for her ability to disappear, but for her talent at making others vanish without a trace. 12 years in naval special warfare had carved her into something that existed in the space between soldier and legend. Her official record showed a decorated pilot with an unfortunate tendency toward insubordination. Her classified record told a different story, one written in the blood of enemies who never saw her coming. As the assault team moved into position, Martinez's voice crackled across base communications. "We have a security breach in Armory Block C, unknown number of hostiles, unknown intentions. Lieutenant Commander Kozlova is currently conducting inventory in that sector." The response was immediate and telling. Instead of the expected tactical units, it was Colonel Brennan himself who seized the radio. His voice carried the weight of knowledge that most personnel weren't cleared to possess. "All units stand down. Repeat, all units stand down. Nobody approaches Block C without my direct authorization." In the Armory, Ghost smiled in the darkness. She'd been expecting this visit for 3 days, ever since the intelligence leak in Kabul pointed back to someone with her clearance level. What her hunters didn't realize was that cornering a SEAL in an armory wasn't a trap, it was a gift. The hunt was about to become an execution. Lieutenant Commander Vera Kozlova had always been an enigma wrapped in contradictions. At 5'6", she moved through the testosterone-heavy world of military aviation like smoke through a hurricane, present but untouchable, visible but impossible to pin down. Her fellow pilots saw her as the ice-cold veteran who'd somehow talked her way into a Hornet cockpit despite being just a helicopter pilot from the teams. What they couldn't see were the scars that mapped her spine like a topographical chart of classified missions, or the way her eyes never stopped calculating angles and exit strategies. The 5 operators surrounding her in the Armory moved with textbook precision, their infrared scopes painting green death dots across surfaces they believed provided cover. Team leader designated himself Actual, his voice a whisper of static through bone conduction headsets. "Ghost Actual to all call signs. Target remain stationary. Execute on my mark." What Actual couldn't have anticipated was that Ghost had spent the last 47 minutes systematically cataloging every weapon in the room, memorizing the location of each magazine, each grenade, each piece of equipment that could be weaponized. More importantly, she'd identified the Armory's blind spots, spaces where the building's steel framework would deflect their thermal imaging and confuse their night vision. "Bravo 2, movement on your 6, came the whispered report. It wasn't movement, it was misdirection. While Bravo 2 pivoted to investigate a shadow that existed only in his peripheral vision, Ghost had already relocated, flowing through darkness like water finding the path of least resistance. Her breathing remained steady, controlled, the kind of respiratory discipline that keeps snipers motionless for days and allows deep-water operators to survive impossible odds. Colonel Brennan's voice cut through base communications again, this time with barely contained urgency. "Martinez, I need thermal imaging on Block C, right now." "Sir, thermal shows multiple heat signatures, but they're scattered, sir. I'm reading 5 distinct sources, but the signatures keep shifting." Brennan knew what those shifting signatures meant. He'd seen Ghost's operational reports from Mosul, from the Hindu Kush, from places that didn't exist on any public map. When thermal signatures started dancing, it meant the hunter had become the hunted, and someone was about to discover why Navy SEALs earned their reputation in the dark places of the world. Inside the armory, Actual felt the first cold finger of doubt touch his spine. The target, who should have been sleeping, was no longer where she'd been 60 seconds ago. His thermal scope showed nothing but empty space where a body should have been. "All call signs, target has relocated. Switch to active search pattern." The response that came from the darkness wasn't tactical chatter. It was Ghost's voice, calm as a Sunday morning, carrying the kind of authority that made grown men reconsider their life choices. "Gentlemen, before we begin, I should mention that you're standing in a room containing approximately 40,000 rounds of live ammunition, 16 fragmentation grenades, and enough C4 to redecorate this entire building. Now, shall we discuss your surrender, or would you prefer the traditional Navy hospitality?" The silence that followed was the kind that precedes lightning strikes and changes everything forever. Actual's tactical training warred with an increasingly urgent survival instinct. The voice in the darkness carried no fear, no uncertainty, only the measured confidence of someone who turned impossible odds into routine victories. His team had thermal imaging, night vision, superior numbers, and the element of surprise. So why did he feel like prey? "Unknown caller, identify yourself and surrender immediately," he commanded, his voice carrying less authority than intended. Ghost's laughter was soft, almost musical. "Unknown caller, that's adorable. You gentlemen came to my house uninvited, disabled my security systems, and pointed weapons at me while I was conducting routine maintenance. I'd say that makes you the unknown quantities." Through his scope, Actual caught a thermal flicker, just enough to confirm she was moving, but not enough to establish a firing solution. His psychological operations training kicked in. Maintain authority, control the narrative, force compliance through projected strength. "You're outnumbered 5-1. Stand down now and this ends peacefully." 5-1, Ghost mused, her voice seeming to come from multiple directions simultaneously. "You know, that's almost unfair, for you." Bravo 2's voice crackled through the comm. "Actual, I've got possible movement behind the 40 mic crates, southwest corner." The southwest corner was a maze of ammunition containers stacked floor to ceiling, creating a three-dimensional puzzle of sight lines and cover. Perfect for someone trained in close-quarters combat, absolutely lethal for anyone who wasn't. Ghost had chosen her battlefield with the same precision she'd once used to select landing zones in hostile territory. Colonel Brennan's voice cut through their tactical frequency. Somehow he'd accessed their encrypted channel. "Unidentified personnel in Armory Block C, you are ordered to stand down immediately. You are engaging a United States naval officer on United States soil. Surrender now or face the full consequences of your actions." Actual felt ice water in his veins. Naval officer meant potential special operations background. Naval officer in an armory at 400 hours meant someone with clearances he couldn't imagine. But his orders had been clear. Eliminate the leak, make it look like an accident, leave no loose ends. "Charlie 3, do you have a shot?" "Negative, Actual. Target has gone full phantom on us." Ghost's voice returned, closer now, intimate as a whisper between lovers. Phantom, I like that. Much better than my actual call sign, which, if you'd done your homework, might have warned you that this was a spectacularly bad idea. The first explosion was small, controlled, just enough to kill the Armory's emergency lighting and plunge them into absolute darkness. In the suffocating blackness that followed, 5 highly trained operators discovered the difference between hunting a target and being hunted by a predator. Ghost had spent 12 years perfecting the art of violence in environments exactly like this one. Every SEAL understood that darkness wasn't an obstacle. It was a weapon, a tool, a fundamental element to be shaped and wielded. Night vision now, Actual barked, but his team was already switching systems. Green-tinted images filled their displays, revealing a maze of military hardware and shadows deep enough to hide armies. The Armory, designed for storage and security, had become a three-dimensional chessboard where every move carried lethal consequences. Bravo 2 report. Silence. Bravo 2 respond. The voice that answered wasn't Bravo 2's. It was Ghost, speaking directly into the fallen operator's radio with clinical precision. Bravo 2 is taking a nap. Mild concussion, zip-tie restraints, and a growing appreciation for the importance of situational awareness. He'll live, assuming the rest of you make smart decisions in the next few minutes. Actual felt his tactical advantage evaporating like morning mist. One operator down without a shot fired, target still mobile, extraction looking increasingly unlikely. His psychological profile of their target, a grounded pilot with disciplinary issues, crumbled against the reality of facing someone who treated armed combat like a casual Tuesday morning workout. Charlie 3 Alpha 4 converge on my position. Diamond formation, watch your crossfire. As his remaining team members moved through the green-tinted darkness, Ghost was already 3 moves ahead. She'd mapped their communication patterns, identified their leader by his frequency of transmission, and calculated the approximate response time for base security to breach the Armory doors. More importantly, she'd recognized the weapons they carried, foreign manufacture, non-standard ammunition, the kind of hardware that spoke to off-books operations and deniable missions. Colonel Brennan's voice cut through their frequency again, but this time it carried the weight of absolute authority. This is Colonel Brennan to all personnel in Armory Block C. You have 30 seconds to lay down your weapons and surrender, or I'm authorizing Lieutenant Commander Kozlova to respond with appropriate force. The title made Actual's blood run cold. Lieutenant Commander, Naval Special Warfare. In his earpiece, he could hear his handler's voice from the original briefing. Simple elimination, low-risk target, minimal complications. Nothing about this was simple, low-risk, or minimal. Ghost's voice emerged from the darkness one final time before the real violence began. Gentlemen, you've had your warning. Class is now in session. The education was swift, brutal, and comprehensive. Alpha 4 discovered that thermal imaging becomes useless when your target understands heat dissipation and controlled breathing techniques. He found himself staring at green-tinted emptiness one moment, then waking up with plastic restraints and a profound headache the next. His last clear memory was the sound of his own weapon being field-stripped in the darkness, each component hitting the concrete floor with the deliberate precision of a metronome. Charlie 3 lasted longer, primarily because he'd chosen a defensive position with overlapping fields of fire and multiple exit routes. His downfall came when he focused too intently on protecting his approaches and forgot to secure his vertical space. Ghost descended from the Armory's ventilation system like a spider claiming prey, her movements so fluid and silent that his first indication of her presence was the pressure point strike that shut down his nervous system. Actual found himself alone in a room full of shadows and unconscious teammates, his tactical situation deteriorating faster than democracy in a coup attempt. Training demanded he continue the mission. Survival instinct suggested immediate withdrawal. Common sense, finally asserting itself after 48 hours of poor decisions, recommended unconditional surrender. Lieutenant Commander Kozlova, he called into the darkness, his voice steady despite the circumstances. I'm prepared to discuss terms. Terms? Ghost's laugh was genuinely amused. Sweetie, you broke into my house, pointed guns at me, and tried to murder a commissioned officer of the United States Navy. The only terms we're discussing involve how much of this incident gets reported to Naval Criminal Investigative Service versus how much gets handled through alternative channels. Actual made his final mistake. Instead of accepting her offer, he went for his sidearm, a last-ditch attempt at salvaging a mission that had been doomed from the moment someone decided to target a SEAL in her own environment. Ghost had been waiting for exactly that decision. The disarming technique she employed was textbook naval special warfare, efficient, decisive, and designed to leave the subject conscious enough to appreciate their circumstances while ensuring complete compliance. When the emergency lights flickered back on, Colonel Brennan found 5 zip-tied operators arranged in a neat row against the armory's east wall, their weapons disassembled and organized by type on a nearby table. Ghost sat cross-legged in front of them, her flight suit unmarked, her breathing steady, looking for all the world like someone who'd spent the last hour doing yoga rather than single-handedly neutralizing a professional hit team. Ma'am, Brennan said carefully, I trust everything is under control. Define control, sir. If you mean are the immediate threats neutralized, then yes. If you mean do we have a larger problem involving off-books operators targeting naval personnel on American soil, then we're just getting started. Colonel Brennan had commanded 3 tours in Afghanistan and 2 in Iraq, but he'd never felt quite as out of his depth as he did looking at Ghost's calm, expectant expression. The woman sitting before him had just demonstrated why Navy SEALs earned their mythical reputation, and now she was waiting for him to explain why assassins had been hunting her in his armory. Lieutenant Commander, I think we need to have a very frank conversation. Yes, sir, I believe we do. But first, I'd like to point out that these gentlemen were carrying some very interesting equipment. Foreign manufacture, non-standard ammunition, and communication gear that's about 3 generations ahead of what we issue to our own special operations units. She gestured toward the disassembled weapons, each component labeled with the methodical precision of someone conducting a formal investigation. This isn't random violence, Colonel. Someone with serious resources wanted me dead, and they were willing to violate about 14 different federal laws to make it happen. Brennan studied the captured operators, their unconscious forms revealing nothing about their origins or motivations. Professional contractors, certainly, but working for whom? And why target a grounded pilot with an attitude problem? Unless, of course, she wasn't just a grounded pilot with an attitude problem. Ghost, he said, using her call sign for the first time, I think it's time you and I discussed your actual service record. Her smile was small, knowing, and carried the weight of classified operations that would never see daylight. Sir, are you certain you have the appropriate clearance level for that conversation? As of 15 minutes ago, I've been granted special access to your complete personnel file, all of it. The silence stretched between them, filled with the weight of secrets that had shaped wars and toppled governments. Finally, Ghost nodded slowly, her expression shifting from careful humor to professional seriousness. In that case, Colonel, you now understand why these gentlemen made such a catastrophic error in judgment. The question is, what are we going to do about whoever sent them? Outside the armory, Kandahar Airfield continued its 24-hour cycle of controlled chaos, unaware that one of its most dangerous residents had just reminded the world why legends earn their names in the darkness. The debriefing room was sterile, windowless, and equipped with the kind of electronic countermeasures that made smartphones weep and recording devices commit suicide. Ghost sat across from Colonel Brennan, her personnel file spread between them like a roadmap through classified history. The pages revealed a career that existed in the shadows between official recognition and operational necessity. Vera Kozlova, Brennan read aloud, recruited naval special warfare at age 22 following exceptional performance in Navy aviation training. Specialized in maritime counterterrorism, direct action, and special reconnaissance. 12 years active duty, 7 combat deployments to locations that don't exist on public maps. Ghost listened to her own biography with the detached interest of someone hearing about a stranger's life. The woman described in those files, the one who'd earned her reputation in places like Mogadishu and Fallujah, felt like a different person from the pilot who'd been grounded for failure to follow protocol. Operation Neptune's Gambit, Brennan continued. Operation Silent Thunder, Operation Crimson Tide. Each classified at levels I didn't know existed until this morning. According to this, you single-handedly extracted a CIA asset from a Taliban stronghold using a helicopter that should have been scrapped for parts. The helicopter performed adequately, Ghost said mildly. It was the intelligence that was questionable. The intelligence suggested the asset was already dead. Intelligence is often wrong. Dead people don't usually radio for extraction. Brennan turned another page, his expression growing more troubled with each revelation. It says here you were transferred to aviation following a classified incident in Syria. No details, just a notation that you were reassigned to minimize operational exposure. The Syrian incident. Ghost felt familiar tightness in her chest, the phantom weight of decisions that couldn't be undone. 3 SEALs dead, 2 civilians wounded, and 1 CIA operation burned to the ground, all because someone in Washington had confused tactical brilliance with strategic wisdom. Syria was complicated, she said finally. According to your commanding officer's report, Syria was a masterpiece of tactical execution that achieved every operational objective while simultaneously proving why SEALs shouldn't be used for political theater. Captain Morrison always had a way with words. Captain Morrison recommended you for the Navy Cross and a transfer to aviation in the same paragraph. He called you the finest operator he'd ever served with and too dangerous for the current operational environment. The room fell silent except for the whisper of air conditioning and the distant rumble of aircraft engines. Ghost studied her hands, noting the scars that mapped her knuckles like coordinates on a battlefield chart. Each mark represented a lesson learned in blood, a moment when training had overcome impossible odds. Colonel, why are we reviewing ancient history? 5 operators tried to kill me in your armory. Someone with serious resources wants me dead. Shouldn't we focus on current threats? Brennan closed the file and leaned back in his chair. The current threat is directly connected to your ancient history. 3 days ago, classified documents were leaked from a server in Kabul. Documents detailing Syrian operations from 2019. Your Syrian operations. The pieces clicked together in Ghost's mind with mechanical precision. Syria, the leak, the assassination attempt, someone was cleaning house, eliminating anyone who could connect classified operations to current political realities. Who else was targeted? Captain Morrison died in a car accident in Norfolk last Tuesday. Master Chief Peterson suffered a heart attack in San Diego Wednesday morning. Lieutenant Torres was killed in a training accident at Coronado yesterday afternoon. Ghost felt ice crystallize in her veins. Her entire Syrian team, systematically eliminated within a week. Professional, deniable, designed to look like coincidence until someone connected the dots. I'm the last one. You were the last one, past tense. As of 4 hours ago, you're officially dead too. Helicopter training accident, mechanical failure, no survivors. Ghost stared at him, processing the implications. Officially dead meant officially free. unbound by regulations and oversight, capable of operating in the gray spaces where justice and law intersected. What are you suggesting, Colonel? I'm suggesting that Lieutenant Commander Vera Kozlova died this morning. What I'm asking is whether Ghost wants to find out who killed her teammates and return the favor. The woman who'd earned her call sign in the darkest corners of global conflict smiled for the first time since the Armory incident. It wasn't a pleasant expression. Sir, I thought you'd never ask. The safe house was a modest ranch home in suburban Virginia, indistinguishable from thousands of similar properties that housed government contractors and military families. What made it unique were the modifications: reinforced walls, redundant communication systems, and a basement armory that would make most third-world nations envious. Ghost stood before a mirror, studying the reflection of someone who no longer officially existed. "Identity documents," said the man known only as Smith, sliding a manila envelope across the scarred wooden table. "Driver's license, passport, credit cards, complete background down to elementary school attendance records. As of today, you're Victoria Kane, freelance aviation consultant with a spotless record and a talent for staying invisible." Ghost, now Victoria, examined the documents with professional appreciation. The photographs were recent, the backstory was comprehensive, and the quality suggested resources that extended far beyond normal government capabilities. Who's paying for this elaborate theater? People who understand that sometimes justice requires operating outside normal channels. Your teammates died because they knew something that powerful individuals wanted buried. We're offering you the chance to dig it back up. Smith was FBI, CIA, NSA, or some combination thereof. His credentials were deliberately vague, his authority mysteriously broad. What mattered was that he'd known about the assassination attempts before they happened and had resources to keep her alive long enough to strike back. "What do you know about the Syrian operation?" Smith opened a laptop, revealing satellite images of a compound in eastern Syria. October 2019, your team was tasked with extracting a high-value intelligence asset from ISIS-controlled territory. Official records show the mission was successful, asset recovered, no complications. Unofficial records. Unofficial records suggest the asset wasn't what he appeared to be. Instead of a CIA source, your team extracted someone with connections to Russian intelligence and American political campaigns. Someone whose debriefings could have influenced the 2020 election. The Syrian asset. Ghost remembered him clearly. Well-dressed, spoke perfect English, claimed to have information about ISIS financial networks. What she hadn't known was that his real value lay in what he knew about money flowing from Moscow to American political organizations. The asset's debriefings were classified at the highest levels and buried in a vault somewhere in Virginia. But 3 days ago, someone accessed those files and began distributing them to journalists. Someone with access to the server in Kabul. Exactly. And now everyone who participated in that extraction is being systematically eliminated to prevent them from corroborating the asset's testimony. Victoria studied the satellite images, her tactical mind automatically identifying approaches, defensive positions, and extraction routes. The compound showed signs of recent habitation, vehicles, communications equipment, security measures that suggested ongoing operations. "This isn't random cleanup," she said slowly. "Someone's running an active operation out of that location. They're not just covering up old secrets, they're protecting current activities." Smith smiled, the expression of someone who'd found exactly the right person for an impossible job. The compound is now occupied by a private military contractor called Cerberus Solutions. Official cover story: anti-terrorism training facility for regional security forces. Unofficial reality: black site for operations that can't be traced back to any government. "And you want me to pay them a visit?" I want you to find out who ordered the death of your teammates and why. What you do with that information is entirely up to you." Victoria closed the laptop and stood, feeling the familiar weight of gear and weapons settling around her like comfortable clothes. The woman who died in a helicopter accident that morning had been bound by regulations, oversight, and political considerations. The woman standing in this safe house was bound only by her conscience and her desire for justice. When do I leave? Your flight to Turkey departs in 6 hours. From there, you'll cross into Syria through channels that don't officially exist. Full support package includes weapons, communications, and extraction if things go sideways. And if things go sideways permanently. Smith's expression grew serious. Then Victoria Kane disappears as completely as Ghost ever did, and the world moves on without ever knowing what really happened in that compound. She nodded, understanding the terms. Some operations existed in the spaces between official policy and moral necessity, where good people did terrible things to protect larger truths. "One last question," she said, pausing at the door. "Why me? Why not send an official team through proper channels?" "Because proper channels are how your teammates ended up dead. Because official teams leave paper trails and congressional oversight. And because sometimes the only way to fight monsters is to send a ghost." Outside, suburban Virginia continued its peaceful routine, unaware that one of its temporary residents was about to disappear into the kind of mission that would never appear in any official record. The Turkish border was a study in controlled chaos, where legitimate refugees mixed with smugglers, where aid workers shared roads with arms dealers, and where the line between legal and necessary became a matter of perspective rather than law. Victoria crossed into Syria in the back of a medical supply truck, her papers identifying her as a Dutch journalist covering humanitarian efforts in the conflict zone. The landscape that greeted her was moonscape barren, punctuated by the skeletal remains of bombed buildings and the improvised architecture of survival. Syria had become a laboratory for human adaptability, where normal life continued against a backdrop of systematic destruction. Her contact was a woman named Layla, a former Syrian army intelligence officer who'd chosen the wrong side early in the conflict and spent the last 5 years building networks that existed outside governmental control. She moved through the ruins of Aleppo with the casual confidence of someone who understood that survival depended on being useful to all sides while belonging to none. "Your target is 40 kilometers east," Layla explained as they drove through checkpoint after checkpoint, each manned by different factions with different loyalties. "The compound sits on the Turkish border, officially neutral territory but actually controlled by whoever has the most firepower on any given day." Victoria studied satellite photos on a ruggedized tablet, noting the defensive improvements that had been added since her last visit. Razor wire, guard towers, vehicle barriers, and communication arrays that spoke to serious security concerns. "How many personnel?" "Varies. Minimum 30, maximum 60, depending on operational tempo. Mix of American contractors, European mercenaries, and local security. Well-armed, well-trained, completely off the books." "Command structure." "Former American Special Operations, but the real authority comes from whoever's writing the checks. Word is they're running multiple operations, weapons trafficking, intelligence gathering, and something involving cryptocurrency that nobody understands." Victoria nodded, filing away details that would inform her tactical approach. The compound represented more than just a target. It was a symbol of how warfare had evolved beyond governmental control, where private armies operated with impunity in the spaces between competing authorities. "What's your stake in this?" she asked Layla. "Two of my cousins worked security there until last month. Their bodies were found in a ditch outside Damascus, executed with their own weapons. Professional job but sloppy cleanup." Personal motivation. Victoria appreciated honesty, especially when it aligned with her own objectives. Revenge was a powerful force when properly channeled, dangerous when left undirected. "I can get you inside," Layla continued, "but extraction is your own problem. Too many people have tried to leave that compound feet first for me to guarantee safe passage out." "Understood. What's the timeline?" "Tomorrow night. New moon, minimal visibility, and most of their security will be focused on a weapons shipment arriving from Lebanon. You'll have maybe a 4-hour window before someone notices you don't belong." Victoria studied the compound's layout one final time, her tactical mind already calculating approaches and contingencies. The mission was simple in concept, complex in execution. Infiltrate, identify the source of orders for her teammates' deaths, and eliminate the threat permanently. "One more thing," Layla said as they approached their final checkpoint. "The Americans running that compound aren't just contractors. They're true believers, convinced they're fighting some kind of shadow war to save democracy. That makes them more dangerous than mercenaries because they think God is on their side." "God," Victoria replied quietly, "is on the side with the better training." As night fell over the Syrian desert, two women who'd survived impossible wars prepared for one more mission in a conflict that had no clear beginning and no foreseeable end. The infiltration began at 2:17 a.m. local time, when the compound's external sensors registered nothing more suspicious than wind patterns across desert sand. Victoria moved through the darkness with the fluid precision of someone who'd spent 12 years perfecting the art of invisible violence. Her approach calculated to exploit the psychological rhythms of guard duty and the technological limitations of even sophisticated security systems. The perimeter was impressive but not impenetrable. Thermal sensors every 50 meters, motion detectors covering overlapping fields, and human sentries positioned according to textbook defensive doctrine. What the defenders couldn't account for was an opponent who understood their systems better than they did, who'd spent years learning to move through environments designed to detect intruders. The first guard tower fell silent at 2:31 a.m. The sentry, a former Marine named Jackson who'd done 3 tours in Helmand Province, never saw the shadow that separated him from consciousness. His radio continued to transmit routine check-ins, Victoria's voice perfectly mimicking his Carolina drawl and casual professionalism. "Tower 6 all clear, just coyotes and sand devils out here." The compound's interior revealed the infrastructure of modern mercenary operations. Prefabricated buildings housing communications equipment, armories stocked with weapons from a dozen different manufacturers, and living quarters designed for personnel who expected to leave quickly and quietly. Victoria moved through the facility like smoke through a maze, her presence registered only by the systematic failure of security cameras and the gradual silencing of patrol teams. Each guard who encountered her discovered too late that their training hadn't prepared them for someone who'd learned combat in environments where second place meant death. The administrative building sat at the compound center, its reinforced construction and electronic countermeasures marking it as the operational heart of Cerberus Solutions. Victoria gained entry through a ventilation system that connected to the building's climate control, a route that required 40 minutes of careful navigation through ductwork, designed to defeat exactly this kind of infiltration. The files she discovered painted a picture of an organization that existed in the gray spaces between government policy and corporate profit. Cerberus Solutions had contracts with agencies that didn't officially exist, funding from sources that couldn't be traced, and operational authority that extended far beyond any legal framework. But it was the personnel files that revealed the true scope of the threat. Captain Morrison, Master Chief Peterson, Lieutenant Torres, all 3 had been under surveillance for months, their movements tracked, their vulnerabilities catalogued, their elimination planned with corporate efficiency. The architect of their deaths was a man named Crawford, former CIA operative turned private contractor, whose psychological profile suggested someone who'd lost the ability to distinguish between patriotism and paranoia. His personal notes revealed a worldview where American interests justified any action, where classified operations were sacred trusts that could never be exposed. Victoria photographed everything, downloading terabytes of data that would provide prosecutors with enough evidence to dismantle Cerberus Solutions and trace its connections back to the highest levels of government. But prosecution required courts, judges, and legal systems that could be compromised or manipulated. Justice, she'd learned in Syria, sometimes required more direct methods. Crawford's office occupied the building's top floor, its windows providing commanding views of the surrounding desert. Victoria found him there at 4:47 a.m., reviewing satellite imagery and drinking coffee that smelled like it had been brewed in a combat zone. "Mr. Crawford," she said quietly, "we need to talk." He turned slowly, his hand moving toward a pistol that wasn't where he'd left it. Victoria held the weapon casually, her finger outside the trigger guard, her posture suggesting conversation rather than confrontation. "You're supposed to be dead," he said finally. "Reports of my death were greatly exaggerated, unlike the reports of my teammates' deaths, which appear to have been entirely accurate." Crawford studied her with the calculating attention of someone who'd spent decades evaluating threats and opportunities. What he saw was a woman in tactical clothing holding his sidearm with professional competence, her eyes carrying the kind of calm intensity that preceded sudden violence. "They were liabilities," he said, "security risks who could have compromised operations vital to American interests. They were SEALs who served their country with honor and died, because you decided their knowledge was inconvenient. Their knowledge could have influenced elections, toppled governments, destroyed decades of careful intelligence work. Sometimes individual lives have to be sacrificed for larger purposes." Victoria nodded slowly, her expression reflecting the kind of understanding that preceded irrevocable decisions. "You're right," she said quietly. "Sometimes individual lives do have to be sacrificed for larger purposes." Crawford had enough experience to recognize the moment when tactical situations shifted beyond negotiation. His last coherent thought was wondering whether his own operational philosophy would survive the encounter with someone who'd perfected its practical application. Dawn revealed a compound in systematic disarray, its security compromised, its personnel neutralized, and its operational secrets scattered across internet servers in 12 different countries. Victoria departed Syria the same way she'd arrived, invisibly, leaving no trace of her presence except the complete destruction of an organization that had existed in the shadows between law and justice. The safe house in Virginia seemed smaller when she returned, its suburban normalcy a jarring contrast to the desert violence she'd left behind. Smith waited in the kitchen, coffee brewing, morning news playing on a television that would never report the real story of what had happened in Syria. "Crawford won't be ordering any more assassinations," Victoria replied, settling into a chair that felt strange after days of sleeping on rocky ground. "The compound, Cerberus Solutions, has ceased operations permanently. The survivors will find more honest work, and the evidence of their activities is now in the hands of journalists who understand its significance." Smith nodded, his expression revealing satisfaction tempered by the understanding that justice sometimes resembled revenge more than anyone preferred to admit. The war between official policy and moral necessity continued, fought by people who existed in the spaces between competing authorities. "What now?" he asked. Victoria studied her reflection in the window, seeing a woman who'd officially died in a helicopter accident, but continued breathing in the gray spaces where necessity and law intersected. The Syrian operation had ended, But the larger conflict continued, a shadow war fought by people who understood that democracy required more than elections, and that freedom demanded more than laws. Now, she said, Ghost finds a new mission. Outside, suburban Virginia continued its peaceful routine, unaware that one of its residents had just reminded the world that some threats required personal attention. 6 months later, Victoria Kane had established herself as a legitimate aviation consultant, her cover so thorough that even she sometimes forgot it wasn't real. The office in downtown Alexandria looked exactly like what it claimed to be. Diplomas on the walls, aviation magazines on the coffee table, and a schedule full of meetings with defense contractors seeking expertise on helicopter operations in hostile environments. What her clients didn't know was that their consultant had spent the previous weekend in Somalia, providing technical assistance to a humanitarian organization whose medical supplies kept disappearing into warlord stockpiles. The missing supplies had been returned, the responsible parties had experienced sudden career changes, and Victoria had added another entry to a private ledger that tracked debts paid and justice served. The knock on her office door came at precisely 3:00 p.m., delivered by a woman whose bearing screamed military despite her civilian clothes. Major Rebecca Torres, Lieutenant Torres' sister, carried herself with the rigid posture of someone who'd learned to find strength in structure. "Ms. Kane, thank you for seeing me on short notice." Victoria gestured to the chairs facing her desk, nodding the family resemblance that made her chest tighten with familiar guilt. Rebecca had her brother's eyes, the same intensity that had made him such an effective operator and such a loyal teammate. "Please call me Victoria. What can I do for you?" "I'm here about my brother's death." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implications that extended far beyond official accident reports. Victoria had expected this conversation eventually. Family members always asked questions, especially when the answers didn't make sense. "I'm sorry for your loss," Victoria said carefully. "According to the reports I read, it was a training accident. Tragic but not uncommon in special operations." Rebecca's laugh was bitter, sharp-edged with the kind of pain that transformed grief into determination. "Training accident. Right. Miguel had 15 years of experience, perfect safety record, and reflexes that kept him alive through 7 combat deployments. But somehow he made a rookie mistake that killed him instantly. Accidents happen, even to experienced operators. Not to Miguel. And not to Captain Morrison, who supposedly fell asleep at the wheel after 20 years of military driving. And not to Master Chief Peterson, who had the cardiovascular health of someone half his age until he suddenly didn't." Victoria felt the familiar weight of operational decisions, the burden of knowledge that couldn't be shared without destroying carefully constructed covers. Rebecca Torres was asking questions that led to answers involving classified operations, dead contractors, and justice delivered outside legal frameworks. "What exactly are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting that 3 members of the same SEAL team dying within a week isn't coincidence. I'm suggesting that someone wanted them dead, and I'm suggesting that the 4th member of that team, someone named Ghost, disappeared around the same time." The name hit Victoria like cold water, a reminder that some secrets couldn't be buried deeply enough to stay hidden forever. Rebecca had done her research, following connections that should have been invisible to civilian investigation. "I don't know anyone by that name." "Really? Because Ghost was listed as KIA in a helicopter training accident 6 months ago, but there's no record of any helicopter crash on that date. No wreckage, no body, no investigation. Just a death certificate and a closed file." Victoria studied the younger woman, recognizing the stubborn determination that ran in the Torres family. Miguel had possessed the same quality, the inability to accept injustice, the compulsion to fight for truth regardless of personal cost. Even if what you're suggesting were true, what would you want me to do about it? Rebecca leaned forward, her voice dropping to the intensity level that preceded life-changing decisions. I want you to help me find out who killed my brother and why. I want you to help me make them pay for what they did. I'm an aviation consultant, not a private investigator. You're also former military. I can see it in the way you carry yourself, the way you scan rooms for exits, the way you positioned yourself behind that desk with clear sight lines to the door. Whatever you did before consulting, it involved more than flying helicopters. Victoria felt the walls of her carefully constructed identity beginning to crack under the pressure of someone who understood that appearances could deceive, and that some truths refused to stay buried. Rebecca Torres was offering her something dangerous and necessary: the chance to honor her fallen teammates by trusting their family with the truth. Hypothetically, Victoria said slowly, if someone were investigating the deaths of those 3 SEALs, what would they be looking for? Justice, Rebecca replied without hesitation, and answers, and maybe a chance to make sure that whoever killed them understands the consequences of murdering American heroes. Victoria opened her laptop and began typing, accessing files that officially didn't exist, revealing connections that painted a picture of systematic elimination and corporate justice. As the data filled her screen, she made a decision that would change both their lives forever. Rebecca, I think it's time you learned about a woman named Ghost. The revelation transformed Rebecca Torres from grieving sister into operational partner with startling efficiency. Victoria had expected shock, denial, perhaps anger at the deception that had hidden Ghost's survival while the families mourned. Instead, Rebecca absorbed the truth with the tactical pragmatism of someone who'd inherited the family talent for compartmentalizing emotion and focusing on mission objectives. So Miguel and the others died because they knew about this Syrian asset, and you eliminated the people responsible. That's a simplified version, but essentially accurate. And now you work as a freelance problem solver for people who can't use official channels. I prefer aviation consultant with diverse operational experience. Rebecca studied the photographs from the Syrian compound, her expression revealing the same analytical intensity that had made her brother such an effective SEAL. You said this Crawford character was the architect, but these files suggest he was taking orders from someone higher up the chain, someone with access to classified databases and the authority to authorize elimination operations. Victoria nodded, impressed by Rebecca's ability to identify patterns that most intelligence analysts would miss. The investigation was necessarily limited by operational constraints. I had to prioritize immediate threat elimination over comprehensive intelligence gathering. Meaning, you killed the guy who ordered the hits but didn't trace back to whoever gave him his orders. Correct. Rebecca closed the laptop and leaned back in her chair, her decision-making process visible in the micro-expressions that crossed her face. Victoria recognized the moment when tactical assessment shifted to personal commitment, the same transformation she'd witnessed in countless operators who'd chosen dangerous missions for necessary reasons. I want in, Rebecca said finally. This isn't a game, Rebecca. The people we'd be investigating have resources that extend to the highest levels of government. They've already killed 3 SEALs and tried to kill me. Getting involved means accepting that you might not survive the experience. Miguel didn't survive staying uninvolved. At least this way, his death serves a purpose beyond covering up someone else's crimes. Victoria studied the younger woman, seeing echoes of the brother who died protecting secrets he'd never fully understood. Rebecca possessed the same moral clarity that had made Miguel such a valuable teammate, tempered by an analytical intelligence that suggested she'd learned from her brother's experiences without repeating his mistakes. If we do this, Victoria said carefully, we do it completely outside official channels. No backup, no legal protection, no guarantee that anyone will ever know what really happened to us. Understood. And we do it my way, following operational protocols developed over 12 years of missions that officially never happened. Understood. And if at any point I determine that your emotional involvement compromises operational security, you're out. No argument, no appeal, no second chances. Rebecca's smile carried the confidence of someone who'd spent her entire life proving that Tor's family determination could overcome any obstacle. Victoria, I don't think you understand. I've been preparing for this conversation since the day they told me Miguel was dead. I've studied everything he ever taught me about special operations, everything he ever said about the importance of mission completion and tactical discipline. She opened her purse and withdrew a folder containing documentation that made Victoria's eyebrows rise in appreciation. Military records, intelligence training certificates, firearms qualifications, and language certifications that painted a picture of someone who'd spent months preparing for exactly this kind of mission. Major Rebecca Torres, military intelligence, specialized in counterintelligence operations and threat assessment. 14 years active duty, 6 combat deployments, fluent in 4 languages, and currently on administrative leave while investigating my brother's death through official channels that keep hitting classified walls. Victoria laughed despite herself, recognizing the kind of systematic preparation that separated successful operations from tragic failures. Rebecca hadn't stumbled into this investigation. She'd been building toward it with the methodical precision of someone who understood that amateur hour got people killed. When did you figure out that I was Ghost? About 30 seconds after I walked into this office. Miguel taught me to recognize operators by their unconscious behaviors. The way you positioned yourself, the tactical gear barely visible under your business clothes, and the fact that an aviation consultant doesn't typically need to bulletproof their office windows. Victoria glanced at the reinforced glass, nodding that Rebecca's observational skills extended to details that most people would never notice. Working with Miguel's sister would be dangerous, but it might also provide the kind of operational support that could turn a revenge mission into something approaching justice. All right, Major Torres, welcome to the team. Our first objective is identifying who gave Crawford his orders. Our second objective is determining whether they represent ongoing threats to national security. Our third objective is making sure they understand the consequences of murdering SEALs, Rebecca finished. Exactly. Class begins tomorrow at 600 hours. We start with advanced surveillance techniques and end with close-quarters combat refresher training. If we're going to war, we're going to war prepared. Outside, Alexandria continued its routine of government contractors and military families, unaware that 2 women had just declared their own private conflict against the shadow networks that operated between law and necessity. The warehouse in Baltimore's industrial district looked abandoned from the outside. Broken windows, rusted metal siding, and weeds growing through cracked pavement that discouraged casual investigation. Inside, Victoria and Rebecca had constructed an operational center that would make most intelligence agencies envious. Multiple computer terminals, satellite communication equipment, weapons lockers, and wall-mounted displays showing connection maps that linked Crawford's death back to a network of contractors, politicians, and intelligence officials. 3 weeks of intensive investigation had revealed a pattern that extended far beyond Syrian operations. Crawford had been eliminating witnesses to multiple classified programs, targeting anyone whose knowledge threatened ongoing operations or future political campaigns. The Syrian SEALs were just the latest victims in a systematic cleanup that had been running for 18 months. Prometheus Group, Rebecca announced, pointing to a corporate logo that appeared in connection with every suspicious death. Private intelligence firm based in McLean, Virginia. Founded 6 years ago by former CIA and NSA personnel, specialized in strategic information management and operational security consulting. Victoria studied the organizational chart they'd assembled, noting the careful separation between public leadership and operational authority. Prometheus Group existed in the gray spaces between legitimate business and classified operations, providing services that government agencies couldn't officially request. The board of directors reads like a reunion of intelligence community leadership from the last 3 administrations, Rebecca continued. Democrats and Republicans, hawks and doves, all united by the belief that some secrets are too important for democratic oversight. And they've been using Crawford's team to eliminate anyone who threatens those secrets. Miguel, Captain Morrison, Master Chief Peterson, plus at least 12 other military personnel over the last 18 months, all classified as accidents, all involving people with access to information that could embarrass powerful individuals. Victoria felt the familiar cold anger that preceded tactical planning, the emotional state that transformed personal loss into professional focus. Prometheus Group represented more than just another target. They embodied the corruption of principles she'd spent her career defending. What's their current operational status? Active contracts with 4 different agencies, security clearances that extend to the highest classification levels, and a budget that suggests they're running multiple operations simultaneously. Rebecca activated another display, revealing satellite imagery of a compound in the Virginia mountains. Their primary facility is disguised as a corporate retreat center, but thermal imaging shows activity patterns consistent with intelligence operations. Minimum 40 personnel, maximum capacity around 100, with helicopter landing pad and dedicated communication arrays. Defensive measures. Extensive but not impenetrable. They're prepared for government oversight and media investigation, but probably not for the kind of direct action that someone with your background might provide. Victoria nodded, her tactical mind already calculating approaches and contingencies. The mission profile was complex: infiltrate a heavily defended facility, acquire evidence of systematic murder, and eliminate threats to national security while avoiding detection by multiple intelligence agencies. Timeline. 2 weeks from now, they're hosting their annual board meeting. Every major player will be in one location, reviewing operations and planning future activities. If we're going to strike, that's our window. And if we're wrong about their guilt. Rebecca's expression hardened, revealing the steel core that had sustained her through 6 combat deployments. Then we walk away and find legitimate channels for justice. But if we're right, if they're responsible for murdering our people to protect political secrets, then we make sure they understand that SEALs don't die unavenged. Victoria studied the mission parameters one final time, weighing operational risks against moral imperatives. The attack would be dangerous, potentially suicidal, and completely outside legal authority. It would also represent the kind of justice that official channels couldn't provide, the settling of debts that courts couldn't calculate. All right, Major Tours. We have 2 weeks to plan the most important mission of our careers. Let's make sure your brother and our teammates didn't die for nothing. The Baltimore warehouse hummed with purposeful activity as 2 women prepared to wage war against an enemy that existed in the shadows between patriotism and treason. The infiltration of Prometheus Group's mountain facility began 48 hours before the board meeting, when Victoria and Rebecca established observation posts in the surrounding forest. The compound sat in a valley that provided natural protection against surveillance while channeling approaches into predetermined kill zones, defensive positioning that spoke to professional paranoia and unlimited budgets. Victoria moved through the tree line with ghost-like precision, her presence undetectable to the thermal sensors and motion detectors that formed the facility's outer security ring. 12 years of special operations had taught her to become one with terrain, to move through hostile environments like wind through leaves. Rebecca approached from the eastern ridge, her military intelligence background providing expertise in electronic surveillance and communication intercepts. Her equipment could penetrate most security systems without triggering alarms, gathering intelligence that would inform their tactical approach. Ghost Actual to Overwatch, I'm in position, Victoria whispered into her throat microphone. Overwatch to Ghost Actual, copy your position. Beginning electronic reconnaissance now. The compound revealed its secrets gradually, like a puzzle whose pieces formed a picture of systematic evil. Rebecca's intercepts captured conversations that detailed ongoing operations, journalists being investigated for security concerns, politicians being monitored for loyalty assessment, and military personnel being evaluated for reliability issues. Victoria's visual reconnaissance identified defensive measures that extended far beyond corporate security. Guard towers, patrol patterns, and weapons emplacements suggested an organization prepared for military assault rather than regulatory inspection. Overwatch, I'm reading encrypted communications traffic that suggests board meeting has been moved up 12 hours. They're expecting some kind of investigation. Victoria felt ice crystallize in her veins. Advanced timeline meant compromised operational security, which meant someone had connected their investigation to Prometheus Group's activities. The careful planning that had sustained her through 12 years of impossible missions demanded immediate withdrawal and reassessment. But Rebecca's voice carried urgent intelligence that changed everything. Ghost Actual, I'm intercepting communication about a final cleanup operation. They're planning to eliminate 12 more targets within the next 72 hours, including military personnel currently serving in combat zones. 12 more SEALs, Rangers, Delta operators, and intelligence specialists marked for death because their knowledge threatened political secrets. 12 more families who would receive official condolences for accidents that were actually assassinations. Overwatch, can you identify the targets? Negative on specific names, but I'm reading location data for operations in Afghanistan, Iraq, and Syria. They're using contractor assets to eliminate American personnel in active combat zones. Victoria closed her eyes, feeling the weight of decisions that would determine whether honor or expedience shaped the next phase of American military history. Withdrawal meant survival, but condemned innocent operators to systematic murder. Attack meant probable death, but offered the chance to prevent further atrocities. Ghost Actual to Overwatch, we're moving to immediate action. Abort surveillance, initiate assault protocol. Copy Ghost Actual, execute Phase 2 on your signal. The assault began at 21:47 hours, when the facility's external communications suddenly went silent. Rebecca's electronic warfare capabilities had severed their connections to the outside world, isolating the compound in a bubble of technological blindness that would last exactly 97 minutes before automatic failsafes restored contact. Victoria moved through the compound's defenses like death incarnate, her approach calculated to create maximum psychological impact while preserving operational security. Guards disappeared silently, security systems failed systematically, and the careful order of the facility dissolved into chaos that spoke to supernatural rather than tactical intervention. The board meeting was in session when she arrived. 12 individuals who'd spent decades manipulating global events from the comfort of air-conditioned conference rooms. They looked up from their classified briefings to find a woman in tactical gear holding weapons that shouldn't have existed and carrying authority that extended beyond any official framework. Gentlemen, Victoria said quietly, we need to discuss the systematic murder of American military personnel. The silence that followed was the kind that precedes either negotiation or violence, depending on choices made by people who'd forgotten that some lines couldn't be crossed without consequences. The confrontation lasted exactly 17 minutes, during which 12 of the most powerful individuals in American intelligence learned that accountability sometimes arrived in forms that congressional oversight couldn't provide. Victoria presented evidence with prosecutorial precision. Names, dates, locations, and methods that painted an undeniable picture of systematic assassination disguised as operational security. You eliminated Captain Morrison because his Syrian debriefings could have influenced congressional testimony about Russian electoral interference, she stated, her voice carrying the calm authority of someone who'd spent years delivering briefings in classified environments. Master Chief Peterson died because his knowledge of cryptocurrency operations could have exposed illegal funding for off-books intelligence activities. Lieutenant Torres was murdered because he'd identified patterns in contractor deaths that threatened ongoing elimination operations. Each accusation was supported by documentation that Rebecca's intelligence work had assembled into an overwhelming case for prosecution, if prosecution had been possible through official channels. The board members' responses revealed the mentality that had enabled systematic murder. National security justified any action. Classified operations were sacred trusts that transcended legal constraints, and individual lives were acceptable losses in service of larger purposes. "You have no authority here," declared the board chairman, a former CIA director whose career had spanned 5 presidential administrations. "These operations are classified at levels that extend beyond congressional oversight. What we do serves purposes that people like you can't understand." Victoria's smile was small, cold, and carried the weight of 12 years fighting wars that politicians started and warriors finished. "Sir, I've spent my entire adult life serving purposes that politicians couldn't understand. The difference is that I served them honorably." The evidence she'd gathered would be transmitted to journalists, prosecutors, and congressional investigators within the hour. The systematic murder of American military personnel would become a public scandal that destroyed careers, toppled administrations, and reminded the intelligence community that some secrets couldn't be protected through violence. But evidence required time to work through legal systems that could be manipulated, delayed, or corrupted. Justice, she'd learned in Syria, sometimes required more immediate methods. "You have 2 choices," Victoria announced, her hand resting casually on her sidearm. "Option 1, surrender yourselves to federal authorities and provide complete testimony about your criminal activities. Option 2, discover why Navy SEALs earned their reputation in places where law and order didn't exist." The board chairman reached for a panic button that would summon security, alert authorities, and transform the confrontation into a public relations crisis that could be managed through traditional intelligence community channels. Victoria was faster. The aftermath was swift, decisive, and comprehensively documented by recording equipment that would provide prosecutors with everything needed to dismantle the networks that had enabled systematic murder. Prometheus Group's operations ceased immediately, their contracts were terminated, and their personnel found themselves under investigation by agencies that specialized in prosecuting treason. Victoria and Rebecca departed the compound through extraction routes that led back to the Baltimore warehouse, where they would spend the next week ensuring that evidence reached the appropriate authorities through channels that couldn't be traced back to their direct action mission. The investigation that followed lasted 18 months and resulted in congressional hearings, criminal prosecutions, and reforms that reminded the intelligence community that democratic oversight extended to even the most classified operations. 3 former directors faced federal charges, 12 contractors were arrested for murder, and the systematic elimination of military personnel became a cautionary tale about the importance of checks and balances. But the real victory was smaller, more personal, and completely invisible to the public record. 12 military personnel who'd been marked for elimination remained alive, their knowledge protected by women who understood that some missions couldn't be accomplished through official channels. Miguel Torres, Captain Morrison, and Master Chief Peterson were posthumously awarded medals that recognized their service while honoring their sacrifice. Their families received closure that extended beyond official condolences, knowing that their loved ones' deaths had served a purpose larger than political convenience. Ghost and Overwatch returned to their civilian identities, their mission complete but their vigilance unending. The war between official policy and moral necessity continued, fought by people who understood that democracy required more than elections and that freedom demanded more than laws. In suburban Virginia, Victoria Kane continued her work as an aviation consultant, her cover so thorough that even she sometimes forgot it wasn't entirely real. Her office in Alexandria received occasional visits from family members of military personnel who died in suspicious circumstances, people who'd heard rumors about a consultant who specialized in problems that official channels couldn't solve. Rebecca Torres returned to military intelligence with a new understanding of how classified operations could serve both national security and personal corruption. Her work focused on preventing the kind of systematic abuses that had killed her brother, ensuring that future operations served America rather than individual ambition. Sometimes, late at night, they would meet in locations that provided both security and solitude, reviewing intelligence that suggested new threats to military personnel and democratic oversight. Their partnership had evolved beyond revenge into something approaching a sacred trust, the commitment to ensure that those who served in dangerous places could trust their own government not to murder them for political convenience. The sky above Virginia was clear and infinite, a reminder that some battles were fought far from public view by people whose names would never appear in history books. Ghost had found her new mission, protecting the protectors, serving those who served, and ensuring that the price of freedom was paid by enemies rather than heroes. In the end, she'd learned, justice wasn't about courts or laws or official recognition. Justice was about making sure that good people could sleep safely at night, knowing that someone was watching over them in the darkness where necessity and honor intersected. The war continued, but Ghost was ready.